Good evening, everybody, and welcome to today's session of City Scripts, which is a book discussion on the many lives of Syeda X, the story of an unknown Indian by Neha Dixit. I'm Asha from the Word Lab team at IIHS, and City Scripts is our monthly curation of book talks, panel discussions, lectures, and more that bring the city alive. If you'd like to know more about what we do, please visit the links in the chat. We'll paste them during the conversation. For today's session, we'll be taking questions at the end, so you can just add them to the Q&A box, and we'll be taking questions towards the end. I'm very happy to introduce today's speakers. We have Neha with us, who's an independent journalist based in Delhi, who focuses on the intersection of politics, gender, and social justice in South Asia. Most of her work is in long-form investigative and narrative formats. She's been widely published in leading magazines and digital publications, and this is her first book. Thank you so much for being here, Neha. Very happy to have you. Our moderator for the session is Divya Ravindranath, who's a senior researcher at IIHS. Her work is at the intersection of labor, gender, and urban health. She's also the co-founder of Cities in Fiction, which is an archival project that seeks to locate real-world and imaginary places in literature. Thank you both so much for doing this evening, and over to both of you, please.
Great. Thanks, Asha. Neha, let me start by congratulating you on the book. I really enjoyed reading it, especially as somebody who does research on informal labor, within our cities. I think it was a really fascinating book because also as researchers, our method, our drive is very different. So also to think about what a journalist does with very similar subject, but very different approach to it. I wanted to start by asking you a question about actually being a journalist and doing a story like this, right? I looked up your website and the kinds of things you've written about. The diversity is, really wide. So while working on all of these other pieces, what does it take for a journalist to actually stick to one story? Because I'm guessing journalists are also under pressure to talk about multiple stories all the time. But this book is really fascinating to me also because you can see the work of so many years in chasing that one particular narrative and story. So yeah, if you could start by telling us a little bit more about that.
Thank you so much, Divya, and thank you, Asha, for the introduction. Divya, very happy to talk about this, and I'm very happy that I'm in conversation with you about this. Uh, Let me start by saying that the book also happened because I was working as an independent journalist. And I've been an independent journalist for the last 12 years. And I always say that apart from not working in a newsroom and not getting a monthly salary, what being an independent journalist does is I think it makes you a better person because you're not constantly reporting or not constantly in that space where you always have to keep producing, where there is no time to process. And like you just spoke about how, there was a time when TV was demonized and they would say that this is 24/7 news. And even then in TV, there was some solace because you had to put out stories for specific bulletins and specific, access for specific time. But now that everything is online and everything is accessible, it's basically you have to keep putting out stuff all the time through the clock. So there's no deadline, there is no time ever to process. So for me, like you said, it was very helpful actually uh, to to work on this simultaneously with a lot of stories that I was doing or reporting on in the last few years. What was very helpful was also the fact that I've always done long form. I started working with Tehelka. That was my first job. It was an investigative magazine. So we were also sort of spoiled. Let me say, I was also spoiled in a way that we would at least get a week to do a story. And later on, I started working with a television channel where, again, thankfully, I was in the investigations team. So I was not supposed to churn out stuff every day. With Since 2012, what also helped me was that a lot, like you said, a lot of stories that I have reported on, it gave me a chance to sort of step back and look at them deeply. Let me give you an example. For example, in 2013, I had covered the Muzaffarnagar riots, and I had looked at cases of sexual violence during the riots. And what was very interesting was the fact that in those riots, 100,000 people were displaced. Most of them were working class people. And when I started spending some time in some relief camps, and women started, uh, 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 speaking about the kind of sexual violence that happened during the riots that took place, all of them initially said that it didn't happen to us, but we know that it happened to some person. And by the end of those 5 weeks, you realize that throughout they were talking about themselves. And so this was also a time just soon after the 2012 anti rape movement. So now news organizations could no longer dismiss stories of sexual violence, but they were also done at a very superficial level. So my reporting was also kind of in depth. I did these stories for Outlook, where I looked at these cases of sexual violence. But once the story was out, I realized that a lot of them had to go back and work in the farms of the people who were actually responsible for that violence against them. And so for me, it opened questions not just about majoritarianism, but also about class and caste. And most importantly, the fact that when we are reporting about these things, uh, sexual violence is just one episode in a person's life, but also there is life before and after. So it helped me. So examples like that, or for example, I'd done another story on a Dalit woman in Sonipat who was a rape survivor, and she was charged for perjury and imprisoned for 10 days by the judge because she withdrew her statement against her rapist in the court. And the reason was that because she was from the Dhanak community, which is essentially a Dalit community, who are farm workers, and the people who were accused were actually from the Jat community. And the Jat Khap Panchayat, the clan council, set up a meeting saying till the case is not withdrawn, nobody from the Danak community in the village is going to get work in those farms. So a lot of these things were helpful in sort of, what we keep saying, and keep now, there is conversation, thankfully, about it. We keep talking about intersectionality. That was not possible in a lot of reporting I was doing, even though I was doing it in a long form way. So through the book, I was able to understand that, there is, for example, labor is not a conversation any longer in the mainstream media, or the fact that the target viewers are decided for each newspaper and each news organization, and most of them are supposed to be urban rich consumers. So there is no conversation definitely about urban poverty or labor or working class issues, except when there is some fire in some factory, or about caste when there is some caste atrocity, or even for that matter, even sexual violence or gender, for example, right? Even the most progressive news organizations say that, yeah, we report a lot about gender, but it's mostly sexual violence and maybe some story on maternal mortality rate or menstrual health or something like that. So for me, it was helpful to integrate all of these things that I had reported on, and they actually fed my knowledge and to further frame my questions while working on this book. So that was helpful.
Great, thank you. And also, if you want to read out excerpts from your book at any point, please feel free to do that. The next question I wanted to ask you is actually, also it really struck me while reading the book that this is the story of one character in some sense, all the relationships, the friendships, and everything. But somewhere it is also a parallel storytelling of the cityscape. It is a parallel storytelling of livelihoods, right? How things have changed because one industry comes in and there's suddenly another one. I was also really struck by sort of how quickly things were moving, with moving from plastic to cloth to all of those things. So there are many, many sort of parallel narratives. There's, people, places, livelihoods, communities being displaced. When you write a book like this, where you're sort of trying to tell many realities all at once, as a writer, do you ever worry that you may be overdoing something, underdoing something? Because I was also parallelly reading, not parallelly, but a couple of months ago, I read Nilanjana Roy's Black River, and that's fiction. But it is also about this sort of sense of, what does it mean? What does our city mean to some people through their livelihoods and where they live and how the city sees them? So when you're writing a book like this, what is that line at which you really have to be careful of not not beginning to look like fiction, but really about a story that's real. But also so many strands, right? So many parallel strands. So I could read it for people, but I could also read it to know what Delhi looks like over a period of time.
Mm-hmm. Uh, See, there are a couple of things to it. Of course, overdoing again is a problem because all of us, as people interested in things, we tend to overload ourselves with information and then we don't know what to do with it. That was a problem with me as well. And particularly because it went on for 9 years. So that was a serious, serious problem. But let me just say, for me, what was very helpful was the fact that for the first 3 4 years since 2014, I was only collecting information in a very unplanned way. So there were unplanned conversations, informal group discussions, and just basically going to places and observing what is happening. And it's only after those 3 4 years is when I started organizing the information that I had and going back with structured questions to fill in the holes that were there in the information that I got. So, for example, you speak about Syeda. Syeda is a peace rate worker, and which is technically recognized as home-based work, right? But I, for one, and then in these 9 10 years, I have understood that most of the people around us, unless you are paying attention, you don't really care that a lot of things that are using are essentially made by piece rate workers, right? Even the fact that the denims that you're wearing or they are washed and there is faded, or your World Cup footballs, or even like almonds, which are now so cool in all the fat diets, and almond milk, or stationery, election stuff. Uh, every possible thing is being made by piece rate workers. So people who are not paying attention still think of it as something being made in a factory with some basic sort of amenities available to the workers. But that's really not the case any longer. So, for me, what was also interesting was the fact that personally and later on, while talking to other people just generally about it, how this work has completely been invisibilized, and the fact that most of the, like, even today there was this report that says that female labor force has increased, but most of that is unpaid work. And so somebody like Saida and many other women, that we still don't have a clear number because most of the NSO surveys are not able to tell us, right, that these are women. And in my own interaction initially also with a lot of women, when I started speaking to them and asked them, "Are you a worker?" And they would say, "No, I am not a worker." And then you would say, "But no, but you're making these football patches and you're stitching them and you're cleaning almonds. So you're doing all of this." And then they'll say, "No, no, matlab, this is just to buy groceries for today, or this is just to buy milk for the children, or to pay for the tuition, pay the tuition fee or something like that." So the fact that Saida did these jobs, 50 jobs in 30 years since she moved to Delhi, and still would get one-fifth of the daily wage, roughly, even after 12, working for 12 to 16 hours with the assistance of her daughter Reshma, which is actually the case for most of the home-based workers. They are mostly assisted by one more member, a child, mostly a daughter. So there is no conversation about this. So every year we keep looking at these female labor force participation, whatever. But the fact that from mass imagination, this conversation has completely been erased, and we've stopped thinking about who does this. So for me to organize that, and like you said, the pace is so much like, and which Saida said also, that I one day she's working in a tea strainer factory, and the child has some her son Salman has some problem in school, and she goes to attend that, and she comes back next day and she's replaced. So the turnaround rate is very quick. And so, which is why Saida also, at one point when I sat with her and I said, "What all?" I sat with her and I said, "Let me note down what all things do you do." And she got really irritated and she said that, "Are you going to do that with a construction worker also and ask the names?" And because that's not relevant. What is relevant is what is the work that is coming your way, and how much can you do it, and what is it going to pay. That's all. So yes, it was difficult. My editors also played a big role, and also late after 3 4 years of sitting and organizing it in a chronological fashion, maybe I think that was helpful. But that's That's that.
I was also thinking a little bit about what does it mean to tell a single or use one protagonist at a time where big data has become our way of understanding the world. Like you said, thinking about female labor force participation. So did you at any point worry that narrating the story from one point of view, or using her as the protagonist and then everything around her, would it sort of dilute the story, because we are all only worried if the number is thrown at us, right, that only these many women are out in the labor force?
Yeah.
Or what does it mean to do this kind of work? So just tell us a little bit about that balance of using a protagonist to talk about actually some really fundamental problems with the economy and the way livelihoods are shaped today in our cities.
So, Divya, let me say my drawback was that I am not trained in any discipline except that I know how to report and have basic idea of what is happening around me. And so let me just say that, but also for a person like me who is regularly reporting on a lot of things related to social justice or maybe labor, for me also it is sometimes very difficult to understand the finer points of data. So both for me and to be able to put it out and make sense of what is really happening, I think that was primarily the reason. Initially it was not just Saida, I was also looking at some another person, but by the time I reached my fourth year of reporting, I realized I have to tell it through one person and her family story, because even in her family, it's Saida is a home based worker. Her one of her sons is a bike mechanic. The other son tried to do various jobs and also had an accident at a construction site at all these real estate sites around Delhi, which are so many. And her daughter Reshma starts working in a mall. And so, even though she almost makes the same money that Saida does, but for her, the aspiration to work in a mall which has air conditioning and which is completely removed from that. So, for me, all of those things were helpful in terms of understanding for myself as a reporter that all these things that we talk about, aspirations of young people, majoritarianism and mall and globalization, these are not in silos. They happen in our lives also, right? A lot of us who grew up were born before the 90s and then later on saw the markets opening up, and suddenly we see that there is, I remember people used to ask their relatives for Camay soap. Relatives used to live abroad and bring Camay soap, and then suddenly it was available and you saw it on TV. So we have also lived that. So for Saida, how did it change to basically bring that in? It was very helpful to weave these 30 years together, both economically and also in terms of the socio-political changes that have come in place in the last 30 years, how we as India we have changed, and how from the people on the margins have been affected by something that is happening up above. For example, the fact that you send some sort of observatory to the space, and at the same time here there is some lynching that is happening, or the fact that you do introduce midday meal schemes, or you do introduce right to education, but at the same time, for example, Saida's children and many other children in the neighborhood have to drop out and start working somewhere else, or the fact that Supreme Court says that now when you go to watch a movie you have to stand up for the national anthem, and at the same time something else is happening in people's lives. So what is actually important and documented, and what is actually happening in the lives of people which are not getting documented in popular imagination? So
I think that
that is helpful. Yeah.
I think for me, that was also sort of thinking about what does it mean to create a personal archive of the city, right? Through one person's story of, I mean, we go to the archives and we look at all these official documentation where individuals are not talked about, or these are the stories that will never make it because perhaps these neighborhoods are also illegal, encroached, quote unquote, not supposed to be there in the first place. So if you can tell us a little bit about that, because also when you look at, doing oral histories of this nature, and now I'm talking about the method, it's not easy to tap into somebody's memory of so many years. So tell us a little bit about that process and about this sort of the very interesting archive that you can create from an individual's own life history of the city that we wouldn't otherwise see in some place.
So I'll just read out an excerpt, but I also wanted to say, Divya, for me also, like I did not grow up in Delhi, but I've pretty much lived more in Delhi than I've lived in Lucknow, where grew up. And even for me, I have always heard of Delhi as a place associated with its rulers. So even if people talk about Purani Delhi ka khana and Old Delhi and the charms of Old Delhi, or it's talked about how there are all these the central government is here and it's the national capital, so it's a power capital. But actually, for me, it was very difficult to see that a lot of this small and medium industrial units that are there around in Delhi, there is not much conversation about it, or even when it's there. For example, I keep saying that I liked Patal Lok quite a bit, but the fact that you talk about a certain part of the city as a place where keede makode rehte, insects live, is the description of the people who actually run the city or built the city and who keep it going. So that was something that came across very starkly to me. I'll read one bit from the book. Yeah, it's from chapter 4. It's called Doorknob. And here it starts. एक और आ गई आकाश नापने. One more has arrived to measure the sky. One more woman has come to measure the immeasurable. When Saida moved to Karaval Nagar, Roopmati said this about her. A few years later, Saida repeated this for Seema, who then said the same for Khushbu. No one remembers the source of this adage, but it continues to be said for every new migrant woman who joins the workforce in Karaval Nagar. Astronomers measure the sky in degrees, minutes, and seconds to confirm if a star has moved closer to the moon. The women workers of Karaval Nagar count the pieces, the dozens, the kilos of things they prepare to measure how close they are to survival. Things that are necessary for a common person's survival: food, snacks, spices, cosmetics, stationery, garments, automobile parts, books, prints, spare parts, decoration pieces, toys, kitchen appliances, hardware, carpentry tools, plumbing material, building material, devotional items, festival goodies, medical supplies, electric goods, electronic goods. Everything is made and packaged here by women on a per piece basis. After Indian independence, while Mumbai and Kolkata saw large scale industrial development, Delhi's master plan ruled out similar industries here. But within the next 25 years, Delhi as a power capital also emerged as the single biggest center for small scale industries and one of the largest wholesale centers for North India. Home based workers are those who are directly or indirectly employed by an employer and work at home or premises other than the workplaces of the employer for remuneration. They are paid piece they are paid piece-based wages, mostly for 12 dozens or 144 pieces, not time-based ones, like those received by workers in a factory who work in shifts. That helps to circumvent the minimum wage set by the government. Saida was one of them now. I'll skip some bit, but I'll read one more bit. Over the next few months, Saida made wooden, metal, and plastic photo frames and was paid rupees 70 for 144 pieces. She then made door hangings, bouquet of plastic flowers, and decorative pieces. Were crocheted with wool for rupees 60 for 144 pieces. She finished and packaged school bags for 60 rupees for 144 pieces. She used she made imitation jewelry for rupees 50 for 144 earrings. I'm skipping some bit of it. Major events triggered demand and supply. When Kalpana Chawla became the first Indian origin woman to go to space in 1997, women in Chandni Chowk and Sabhapur dressed up plastic dolls in hand-stitched white spacesuits. During the 1999 Cricket World Cup, everyone wanted fall leather balls, so the women sat in Sukhbir Gujjar's farms and stitched hundreds every day to be supplied to the Sadar Bazaar wholesale market. Similarly, I'll skip some part. It says when Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee made a goodwill visit to Pakistan, they stuck India-Pakistan stickers on several miniature buses sold in toy shops. Over time, Saida put together a toolbox which she fondly called her Jadu Ka Pitara. Reshma is her daughter. Reshma later started referring to it as her CV. the only comprehensive testament to the variety of jobs she had done for years. It was a big iron trunk, as big as a coffee table, her constant companion, and it contained pliers, screwdrivers, and many other things. Now I read this because, you know, all the possible things, even the string lights that we use now, Diwali is going to be around the corner, the festive season is going to start, every possible thing is being made. And in the Delhi conversation, this just does not exist. The fact that the largest number of wholesale markets in North India here, uh, and some of them are biggest in Asia, but that conversation just somehow does not seem to happen. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think I really quite appreciated the imagery in the book, right? Because you don't shy away from describing material, the processes, the tedious, nature of this work. And the toolbox CV was a really very interesting way to think about all the types of work women do. And actually, that's a question we've been grappling with in a lot of our research also. We've just done some work with ILO on employers of domestic workers, where employers will say, but this work doesn't have skill. They're just cleaning the house. And then in the same breath, will also say, we want the worker to stay with us a couple of years because I'll have to train her again. So, what are you training for if the worker doesn't have skill? So, tell us a little bit about, when you begin to look at these various types of work that women are doing and trying to capture all of it. Um, does it at any point get difficult because perhaps nobody takes this work seriously, right? Even the worker, because they just don't, they just keep moving from work to work. So what does it actually take to draw out what each of these tasks mean and the drudgery of it? And you describe a lot of these tasks quite in detail, starting from all the way the weaving that her family was involved in Banaras, and then the movement to the city and so on.
Actually, now, Divya, when I think of it, I feel like the categories that have been set out, I think we have reached a point where we need to rethink these categories. What is it that we are calling skilled and unskilled is something that is very gray now, not even just in Saida's context, and I'll talk about it in a bit, but even the fact that now that everything is moving to a gig economy where people are doing several things. So you may be delivering things, but you're also maybe doing something else in the morning and also a job in the evening. So the fact that Saida, who was a weaver in Banaras and her family was, so she learned this was a family occupation and tradition, and a lot of family labor was involved. Everybody in the family had to pitch in, and that's how Saida's training also happened. So girls are often trained in preparatory work, and the men have the prerogative to sit on the loom and do the weaving. So Saida learned it like that. But even now, it's not easy to uh, sort of make tea strainers one day, and next day you're making pressure cooker parts, and next week you're sticking bindi, and the fourth week you're making string lights. This requires an immense amount of skill, which is not recognized. And women, for example, I'll also say this is something why it's very important that a lot of women are engaged in this, because there is a question of self-worth here. Men have a higher sense of self-worth. So I have seen year after year, and lots of studies also tell us, men, if not given, and in this condition, in this situation, in Karaval Nagar, if they were not given 250 rupees a day, they would sit idle the whole day but not take up that work. But for women, because the priority was to buy veggies that day for children or to buy milk for children that day, they would work for 80 rupees, 90 rupees. So it's also a gendered conditioning of self-worth, and also what one is prioritizing all the time. So they take it seriously, and they, like, there is one bit that I skipped, and I read that paragraph to you. How do they actually learn this work? uh, since every house had a home based worker, Saida had learned that the most common way to find work was to go out and ask around. No one gave any instruction or training to make these things. No one told you which tool you may need to get the job done. If you didn't know how to do something, all you had to do was go help another woman with her domestic chores so she could squeeze out half an hour from a busy life to teach you how to do it. There was always piece rate work available because of the number of wholesale markets. Now, here knowledge is being passed on, right? But it is because it's not documented in those categories that still exist. And I think there is need to start revisiting those. I think, which is why still when there is any conversation about what wages they should be paid, and they say, okay, this is unskilled labor, but it's actually not, right? So it was really funny at some point, this conversation I was happening when Syeda told me that, I used to roll these agarbattis and I realized, okay, these agarbattis are made with cow urine or something. So I really got excited as a reporter, but she's like, I'm doing this. And then she said, I am telling you about Banarsi weaving and how to weave Banarsi sarees. Are you interested in agarbattis? So even the gradation lies in her head, which all of that work could be unskilled technically, but all of that requires immense skill. So I think the categories have blurred, and there is a need to rethink how we are evaluating people's work now.
Yeah. Also, sort of the texture of her life, right? The music, the movies, friendships, solidarity, people sort of, enabling them in the city. All these other characters that come in and go, who sort of help them find their feet in the city at different points in time. Then there's a neighbor who's helping her, and there's childcare. Like there's so much happening. When you are trying to write so many characters in, while you also have a protagonist, what does it take to balance that, without, because I'm guessing each of those characters could have been a story.
Yeah.
And so at many points I was like, but I want to know some more about this other lady. But I understand that your focus is somewhere else. So how do you sort of control that? And here also there is the question of identity, because Syeda is a Muslim woman in a country that is rapidly changing. The environment is rapidly changing. So how do you sort of stick to that, be aware of it, but also take care that you're still sticking to that one story that you really want to tell us?
No, of course, it was very complicated, and which is why I've had like big portions that have been asked by my editor to remove, because obviously I was being greedy and trying to talk about everyone. Uh, but yeah, so it was central also. Saida was central. Her family and her story and her family story was very integral to what I was trying to look at. And essentially, uh, towards the end, I realized that I actually want to streamline to these 30 years and also run it parallel with what is happening. Because Saida was kind of very affected by the majoritarianism and by the kind of dilution of labor practices, forget labor laws, or even her children for that matter, very affected by the contemporary sectarian politics that exist, or the kind of majoritarian politics that exists. And eventually the fact that she was affected by in the 2020 riots, which was not part of the book, but while I was working on it, it happened. So all these things, but at the same time, why these all these other stories are very important is because now all the, in the popular accessible domain, for example, all the OTT films now about are single character led, and then they go and change the world. Basically that's the story. But actually that sort of individualistic sort of way of conquering the world, it's not true. It does not happen. You need support, and you have people around you always, and there is a demand for structural support, but there are also people who support you in all possible ways as when you lead your lives. And so, which is why somebody like Razia in Sabhapur, this village that I was completely fascinated by, because it's half in Delhi and half in UP. So it's very convenient for in many, many ways. So the fact that Razia walks in and says, okay, here, feed your children first because they're really like crying all night. And the fact that nobody has asked this Razia to do it, but the fact that women uh, take up the responsibility and the initiative to go and help. So, or the fact that Nisha Radio Wali, who actually provides a space to a lot of women to just come and take a nap, something as simple as that, or just to say that, okay, now we're going to have a 20-minute lunch break no matter what. So you have to bring one roti and sit and eat in those 20 minutes. So some basic functionality of people and how they can survive is being thought actively by these other people. And so it's very important to acknowledge the role of so many people of a community that exist around us, and collectives that, informal collectives that exist around us, to help us do whatever is needed. So which is why it was nice. And of course, Saida and her family's interest in cinema, which everybody in what the Indian subcontinent is crazy about. And of course, so that is also the most accessible way to any kind of entertainment or keep your mind away and watch something. So yeah, it was good.
Okay. I'll just ask maybe one or two questions and then we'll open it up for the audience to ask if they have any questions. I was also thinking about this, so you talk about identity, you talk about migration, you talk about aspiration. The women are also extremely entrepreneurial in the sense of like going, seeking, looking for work. I remember that in the first few chapters somewhere, she just starts washing clothes of people living in this lodge that, they found a room just to make some money on the side. But it's also very clear how, and you mentioned it before, about how gendered this sort of workscape is, right? In some sense, men waiting for that job to come to them, whereas women going out and seeking work, all kinds of work, because they just have to keep the families running. So tell us a little bit more about like what is this distinction that you saw in the labor market between the kinds of work women were doing and the kinds of work men were doing. And if you were to tell the story from the perspective of a man, uh, what would it look like?
So
Would it allow for such a complex story, firstly?
no, of course, there's complexity there as well. There are two, three things to it. First, the fact that, generally, yeah, women are all the time looking for avenues to do things. I mean, something very basic as, every year this board exam results are declared and women or girls are always doing better than the boys. Or the fact that, women always know that nobody is going to give them 10,000 rupees and say, okay, go open a shop and do something with your life. That's never going to happen, which will happen with men. And so men grow up with this security that, okay, I deserve something, and there'll be some structure to find work or make some career for yourself. And this is across classes, which the kind of security that women do not have if they want to go out and work. So this kind of seeking work also comes from there, that okay, whatever is available to make money, I want to do it, and open ways. That's definitely there, and which is why it's gendered. Also the fact that men in this case, if you see Akmal, who was an extremely skilled weaver and specialized in a certain kind of Banarsi weaving, when affected by the kind of police brutality that he was subjected to, or the kind of violence that he faced, and then from being a specialized weaver to being reduced to a porter, and then to a cart rickshaw puller all his life, the kind of toll it took on him. These are also questions of masculinity, right? That you were this person everybody used to look up to, and the saris you would made, and now you are here, pushing carts in Purani Delhi, and later on being working as a rickshaw puller, not able to earn enough, not able to hold on to your job, keep depending on the wife, so you can't play the man. So in this patriarchal but also majoritarian world, and also a world that does not think much about labor, these are the challenges that men face. Or the fact that Salman, Saida's daughter, second son, all the trying to all the time trying to be Salman Khan, because he was actually named after Salman Khan, but is just not able to match up, and so is bullied, wants to be a bully but can't be, beaten up, not able to hold on to a job. Or the fact that Saida's son Shazeb, the only window he thinks that he can be a hero actually is to 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 leave with the woman who shows some confidence in him. So these are complex things that are happening, but there is no sort of conversation. One bit, do we have time? I can read one bit about Shazib. Okay. So this is from chapter 6. It's called Soft Toy. It was a cold, grey winter evening in December 2012. Shazib had asked Reshma to buy 2 dozen glass bangles. Reshma took her own sweet time, carefully selecting the color and style from Som Bazaar, the weekly Monday market in Karaval Nagar. She assumed Shazib wanted for her to help in buying these to gift to a girl, and thought he would let her keep at least half for herself. He took them all, which disappointed her. On 16 December 2012, Shazib stuck a newspaper cutting with a picture of Salman Khan with the black Hayabusa on the wall of their one-room house right above the spot where he slept. The same night, 4 men gang raped a 24-year-old student in a moving bus in Delhi. For an entire month following this, the national capital witnessed massive anti-rape protests. A week after the gang rape, Bobby, the owner of the Shocker repair shop, asked Shahzeb to join him for a bike rally at India Gate. That was the day Shahzeb asked Reshma to buy the bangles. 20 young men left Karawal Nagar at around 7 in the evening. When they reached India Gate, 45 minutes later, there were around 30 more bikers waiting for them. Some had posters that read, Damini deserves justice. Damini was a name given to the victim in this case. They all did several rounds of India Gate yelling, Delhi police down, down. Damini deserves justice. On their last round, they threw bangles at the Delhi police personnel there. Throwing bangles was a way of saying that Delhi police were not men enough to protect women. And so they would wear bangles like women, because for them, being a woman meant being weak. Shahzeb was not bothered by all these deep things. He was riding a Pulsar that had come for repair that same morning. It was a bike that was sold with the tagline, definitely male. For him, at this moment, he was as different from his father as possible. He was riding a bike at India Gate, where he had only been twice in all these years of living in Delhi. The ride on a warm winter night, with the chill in the air, made him feel invincible, top of the world, desirable, tough. The moment when you taste self-worth for the first time in life. And the chance to humiliate Delhi police publicly made him feel powerful. I'll skip some bits, just 2 sentences more. Delhi police, the words ordinarily made Shahzeb tremble with rage. Each time there was a burglary in a house or shop, a bike was stolen, or a dead body was found in the Nala, the police would come and pick up a few boys from the neighborhood. One day, something happened and Shahzeb was again picked up. I'm skipping that bit. And there was clear evidence who had done it. Yet the police picked up 21-year-old Shahzeb, who had just started working as an assistant at a grocery shop. Aftab, a worker from Bihar in the pressure cooker factory, and Bablu the barber next to the grocery shop. Delhi prisons are overcrowded by 75%. They are most crowded and violent in the country. So once they were arrested, no one looked for Aftab. Nobody tried to get him released. 1 year later, someone told Shahzeb he had been charged for that crime. The police always came to the sweatshops to pick up men, young boys who had recently migrated to find work. They would go missing for weeks, months, years. Very few were fortunate enough to have family members who would come all the way to look for them. Delhi became the city where young poor boys from UP and Bihar came and disappeared. Now, why I read this is because we talk about men also from the same working class condition as Syeda, and this is what they're subjected to repeatedly because of their religious identity or the fact that they are poor and from the working class.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I think it's also interesting because when we talk about women's lives, the complexities, I mean, at least me as a female researcher, I'm so quick to identify with the complexities of their lives, but it takes a very different kind of outlook and perhaps discipline to also engage equally with the idea of masculinity, with male aspiration, and so on. My last question to you, and then there are some questions in the chat as well, is on the method. And I'm particularly interested in this because I do a lot of ethnographic work. Tell us a little bit about what does it take to do data collection over so many years, not lose track of where you started, what you want to do, the themes that you're uncovering, how many notebooks, how much scribbling, where. Just tell us a little bit about that process.
Okay, so I don't think I'm the right person to say anything, but I'll just tell you what worked for me, which is that see, because I'm a journalist, I was only looking at uh, collecting information, corroborating it, and the corroboration was kind of difficult because, like I read earlier, also that. Especially for people on the margins, documentation also requires resources. And so the fact that somebody has been picked up by the police and kept detained at the police station the whole day, there is no evidence for it. Or the fact that at one point, like I said, I started asking Syeda her wages and she couldn't remember or say. So, and know who decides who is going to be paid per piece. There is no answer to that. It just randomly changes. So these things were kind of complex. So for my approach was like we do in journalism, you have to corroborate from three different sources, and that's what I've tried to do. A lot of I also had to come to terms with the fact that a lot of oral history is coming my way, and I have to keep that in mind. A lot of things, particularly which were coming from a space of trauma, it took several times and several ways over the years of conversation to piece those pieces together. So that was that. A lot of times I could not use any electronic device to record, uh, even a dictaphone. And so mostly it was notebooks. And so, yes, of course, there were lots and lots of notebooks. But the process was very simple: get the information, put it out in a document. And after 3, 4 years, I started organizing them in a chronological fashion in terms of time, and then going back and filling loopholes. So that was pretty much uh, how this was done. And the priority always was to look at labor, gender, and what is happening in terms of the socio-political key moments in these 30 years, and how they had affected Saida and many other people in the book.
Great, thank you. I must also say I really appreciated in each of the sections where you start by telling us what was happening in the country at that particular moment. I think it's a great way to sort of ground the reader, because this is not somewhere far away or something like that. But at least for many of us who've grown up knowing these moments, it's also a great way to think about what was I doing then and how much has my life changed versus somebody who is doing this kind of work where their life is changing practically every day versus mine stays that stable, right? It's a really interesting way to contextualize it for the reader. We'll move to some questions from the audience. And actually, the question that Vishal has put up was something that you were talking about how do you talk to somebody without feeling extractive about, because you said you were really focused on their narratives and then trying to corroborate it with, other evidence. So did you at any point grapple with feelings like that? And, especially while you were reporting and trying to put it all together?
So, I mean, that's such an important question because these are really ethical questions that need to be thought about. Uh, not just with this book, but in all these 17 years of reporting, and a lot of reporting has been about uh, uh, incidents that are not particularly pleasant, because as a reporter, that's what you eventually end up reporting. I have realized there are two things. One is the fact that uh, when you ask personal questions, people also ask you personal questions.
Yeah.
So only when you are ready to answer those questions yourself is when you can pose those questions. So that happened with me also quite a bit. And not just with this book, but throughout it has happened where people have asked me all kinds of things. And I have also asked people. Uh, a lot of times you also realize that people don't want to talk about things for the fact that till 2018, for till 4 years of knowing Saida, I did not know that she had one more son, which is Shahzeb, that I just read about. And then one day she decides to trust me and tells me about Shahzeb and says that, oh, he has left with a woman he was in love with. And then I come back and I write the chapter. And 4 months later, she tells me, no, but pata hai, jab Indian Mujahideen people related to Indian Mujahideen were arrested, Shahzeb was also picked up in 2010. So I come back and I realize, okay, this is something again that needs to be sort of written and included. So people take their time to trust, and uh, or the fact that even till now, when the book came out and I told Saida book aa gayi, it's here, and she said again asked me ki, who all are there at home? And I said, same people you knew earlier. And her thing was, oh, you still don't have children in the 9, 10 years of coming to me and talking about it. So now, if I am asking questions, I also have to answer those. So there is no what do you say, no correct way to figure out whether you are being extractive or whether you're being ethical. For me, it was a lot of time figuring on my feet and understanding whether this conversation needs to happen, not that does not need to happen, and perhaps which is why it took 9 years, because it wasn't really easy. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. The other question by Nivedita Ramesh, and I was actually also going to ask you this question. In the book, did Saida's life become a consolidation of other women's lives? In that you included details from other lives into her life, so as to maintain the single protagonist's view.
No, it's not a composite character at all. There's not a single person who's sort of composite in this book. All stories and all people are real. Of course, there is a lot of temptation to make characters composite, but the kind of stories that I was writing, it was very important that I sort of keep them there and uh, tell them in the most honest way as possible.
Yeah, which is why, like I said before, I think for me, like the two books between yours and Nilanjana Roy's, it's like the sister books of what I want to know about Delhi. One non-fiction, one fiction, but such close stories about how people, places change over a period of time. The next question is by Anjana Kanwal. Religion-based arrest by Delhi police. Is the data random?
Religion-based arrest by Delhi police?
The question is the data random?
The data is not random; it happens, and if you look at a lot of, I mean, in Delhi definitely, and if you look at the global studies also, if you look at the national crime record data, you will see that the population of or the proportion of Muslim prisoners in Indian jails is far higher in terms of the population of Muslims in India. So there these numbers are actually from the National Crime Record Bureau. So there have been number of those studies, even for Delhi, for example, Delhi jail. Uh, uh, we have the Mandoli complex and we have the Tihar complex. And you still see that the number of people, not just Muslims, but also OBCs and Dalits, is far higher than their presence in the overall population.
Okay, thank you. And the last question is by Yash. What are the instances and practices of resistance, and how do they look like in the kind of households that you have been talking about in the book?
Practices of resistance, actually, I also realized that there are two things. In the last 10 years, the kind of conversation or framing of what resistance is something we all need to think about, because it has been challenged time and again, whether it's by the farmers in the farmers protest, or whether it's by the women in the anti-CA protests, right? So what is actually resistance and how people are sort of negotiating and navigating their way to sort of protest or resist is something very complicated. For example, in Saida's life as well, I've talked about it in the book, where they come together, and that is the time when she was working as an almond, she was cleaning almonds and packaging, cleaning the shells and packaging them and sending it back to the Western countries. They come together, and so because it's impossible to make a union of home-based workers because they don't have a factory floor, a lot of times they're doing various work, so they don't have the same job. So some people try to make a union at a neighborhood level. So also people are constantly thinking of different ways to come together, unionize, mobilize. And so here in this case, Saida's resistance in this through this almond workers factory strike was that after a couple of weeks of the strike, they could get a 10 rupee raise. Now Reshma, her daughter, is almost mocking her and saying, so much for 10 rupees. And then she says, this is going to be enough for buying 10 rupees per day means buying groceries for 15 days. So that's going to be enough money. So what is it that at that point is important for somebody to resist and find a better tool to kind of bring it to completion is something which is constantly changing, and it's really, really nice that people are finding their way. So it was here as well. Yeah.
Okay. And the last question, and also I think a good question for us to close with, and this is a question for both you and me, but I'll let you answer. Your work takes you into a world that is very different from your personal sphere. How do you reconcile both worlds every day?
See, I'm a person of privilege, of caste, of class, right? And in many, many ways, I can through these years of working on the book also, I was not live part of that world. I was entering that world and I was coming back to my safe comfort zone. right? So to have that clarity is very, very important. Yes, you kind of realize how privileged you are, because here there is demonetization and people are not cooking 3 times a day to save fuel, and here you are again sitting and watching TV and looking at the prime minister telling you do this and do that. So there is clear sort of distinction. uh, so having that clarity helped me that okay, I'm only here to put this together, and this is my life, my world is very different. And how the fact that this clear gap, at least for me personally, I don't know what I can do for the world or whatever, but for me personally, I have to understand what is it that I don't know that is enabling my life and I have not noticed it. So that clarity helped quite a bit.
Great. Thank you so much for your time. And I'll hand over the mic back to Asha.
Thank you, Divya.
Thank you both. This was so engaging and so insightful. And thank you to the audience for sharing such lovely questions with us. Our next City Script session will be on the book City as a Memory, a short biography of Srinagar by Sadaf Vani, and it'll happen on 18th October on Zoom. We'll be sharing details soon, so you can follow us on our social handles, and our website link should be in chat. And thank you again, everyone, for joining us on a Friday evening. And yeah, hope everyone has a good weekend, and then we'll see you for the next one soon.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.